Hello fish fools, Jeff here. So this is my 30-gallon planted livebearer community tank. I've had this tank up and running for a year and a half, and my plan was to start it with guppies, platies, corridors, and neon tetras. That was the original plan, and I did stick with that plan, but I expanded on that plan and I added several other species along the way. So I wanted to go over the cast of characters in here, because it's been a little over a year and a half since I first got the first fish. I got back into the aquarium hobby in July of 2017. And the very first fish that I got, one of the three remains. The very first fish I got was a blue platy female, and she died a while back, but she is the mother that started this whole colony of guppies in here. And I got that at a PetSmart. I think it was a PetSmart. And then I moved on to another PetSmart that day, and I got a pair of Marigold Variatus Platies. And now I have lots of them in here from that original pair. And within the past week, that original female died. But the original male is still here, and I've always been able to identify him among the rest. I mean, like some of the others, I don't know one from the other, they all look the same. But I mean, he particularly looks different now because he's an old man fish. And this is him right here. He is looking old and weathered. And I don't know how much longer he's going to live, because I guess the lifespan for livebearers like these, like guppies and platies, would be about, maybe around 2 years. And I've had him for a year and a half, and I got him when he was an adult, so I'm figuring he must have been in probably at least 6 months when I got him, so that's 2 years. And he was like, that first day I got those 3 fish, within a couple days I got a few more, and this red platy right here, Large Marge, is one of the original fish that I got in the first batch of quarantine. Like, all the fish in here, except for the ones that were born in here, have been quarantined before being added to this tank. And I've gone through, I think, 7 stints of quarantined fish that were, quarantined together before being added to this tank. So those 2 are the last original fish, among with, it could have been, I also had the first few corridors. I had 3 corridors, Julie corridors to start with. I did, through other quarantine periods, I did a peak at 7 Julie corridors, healthy corridors scurrying around. It was awesome when they were all healthy and running around, but there's only 1 left, unfortunately. And don't see it right now, but maybe it'll show itself. But I did have, like I said, I had as many as 7, and gradually they died off. All right, here we got a couple of shrimp. There's one there and one there, or just kind of got lost there, right here, there, and there. While those are out in the open, I wanted to point them out because sometimes they're hard to find. But yeah, the corridors, I did notice some of them had worn barbells, and I think that had to do with, this gravel is a mixture of Eco-Complete and just regular gravel. I guess the Eco-Complete kind of has some jagged edges, so that might have contributed to wearing down their barbells, and that in turn may have contributed to their demise. But after that first group of fish, I got my second round of quarantine fish included the first batch of neon tetras. Altogether, I think I peaked in this tank. I might have 13 or 14. Altogether, I bought 15, but some died in quarantine in 3 separate stints. But the second batch of quarantine fish, and there's a shrimp again right there. Out of the way fish, right there. So the second round of quarantine fish is when I got ick. This tank had ick when, so that old man, where is he? Old man Variatus Platy right here is an ick survivor, along with large Marge and some of the neon tetras in the first few guppies that were born in this tank. But initially, the first 2 stints of quarantine, I used Aquarium Co-op recommended quarantine medications of erythromycin and General Cure. But instead of ICX, I used Cordon Prevent Ick. So I had no issues with the first batch of quarantine fish, but the second batch, I used that Prevent Ick. And after a stint in quarantine, and I didn't notice until I added all the fish in here, and then I noticed a couple white spots on one of the neon tetras, and I was kind of like, uh-oh, I hope that's not what I thought it was. And then it turned out it was indeed ick, and it spread throughout all the fish in the tank, and I had to Prevent Ick didn't work, and I tried to crank up the heat. Eventually I got ICX and did ICX treatment, and that resolved it. But in the process, I had a couple of the fish died. So some of the original fish in the second batch of quarantine. But I also had some, let's see if I can find the autosynclus. I only have 1 left in this tank right now. There it is. But I had as many as 3 healthy ones in here. Altogether, I've actually bought 10. A lot of them died in quarantine or died shortly after moving into this tank, but for a while I had 3 healthy ones, and now I'm down to 1. I mean, that's one of the things about fish keeping, is that unfortunately fish do die. And of these other fish, along with my first original quarantine fish, I also had what was a black red-tailed Variatus Platy. Kind of some of the offspring in here, it didn't have much of a red tail, but I think cross with some other platies produced some of these. Like, there's a cool one with black Most of the tail is black, and I had a green lantern platy. Like that you could have seen in some of my earlier videos. But there's, let's see, there's this one right here. You can see that it's, I'm certain that's one of the offspring of it, because you can kind of see the green shininess at certain angles. And this fish right here is also one of the original offspring. This one was not born in this tank. This fish right here. This was born in the first quarantine tank in my 10-gallon, and I moved it in here. It's one of two that remain from that original batch of platies born in that tank. The other is in my 5.5-gallon tank right now. And in that same second quarantine stint where I got ick, I had a pair of these gold, I lost it in the melee, right in here. There's a gold Mickey Mouse platy. That's not one of the originals, that's an offspring. But the mother died in when this tank had ick, and the male I moved to my 10-gallon tank, which has since died. That's one of the offspring there. It's the one of two that remain. It's a female in here. I have a male like that in my mutt guppy tank. I actually had some of them, a couple healthy ones. I had another female that was pregnant and ready to give birth, but one time when I did a water change, I cleaned the intake sponge, and then when I put it back, the sponge wasn't tight enough and it was loose, and I had fish that got sucked up into this tube, and that was one of them that died. So that was another, another way that fish died. And I also had some Dalmatian platies. They were kind of like pink and white with black spots. One of my earliest videos, I showed the male that had dropsy very early on. The female died shortly after, I think, from, contributed from the ick. But I think this is one of their offspring. There's two platies in here like this. They're kind of like calico. So I think it was either, the male was, the original male was going after all the females, so it's part of the reason why I moved him to my 10-gallon tank. So I think he was the father with the Dalmatian mother. And on Black Friday of 2017, I got that roseline shark. So it's been, and I moved them in here about a year ago after a stint in quarantine. So he was in quarantine together with the male dwarf gourami. Where is it? Back there. And that's actually my third try with a male dwarf neon gourami. The first one I got died in a day. The second one died after a month when I was just going to move it from quarantine, and then I got that one, and now that one has lived in this tank for a year after about might have been a month in quarantine before that. This one stands out. I like that one. So they've a lot of them have, kind of mutts crossed between maybe this large marge, could be a large marge offspring, and crossed with one of the other fish. You can see these red wag platies. There is an original mother red wag platy. She's one of the biggest, one of the biggest fish. But I think these are crossed between Marigold Variatus Platies because they kind of have like the, look like they have their traits. And let's see, I have some yellow cobra endlers. I actually had one of a yellow cobra endler was in quarantine with the old man Variatus Platy and large Marge, and that survived ick. It got past ick, but then one day, I mean, he seemed fine and then just disappeared. So I don't know what happened with him. Sometimes fish just appear, they die, other fish eat them. I don't know what happened. There's a shrimp. But then I got another yellow cobra endler, the same time with the roseline shark, and that was released in this tank at the same time, and that has since bred with a guppy. So I think right here is a female half endler, half guppy. There's a couple clear females in here that are entirely colorless. I think those are their offspring, and then all the males, it's maybe 4 or 5 males. Yellow cobra endler males. There's one. And these guppies, I've never had a male guppy that I added to this tank. My first attempt at getting guppies, like that very first fish that I got that I mentioned, the blue female, she lasted and gave birth to a bunch of these, and they grew up nice and healthy, but none of the original males lasted. This one's kind of sick right here. She had dropsy. She kind of deflated some. She was fatter and her scales are kind of pine coned. But yeah, I never had a male that I was able to transfer in this tank. In the very beginning, I had a hard time getting healthy males. They just, they died in quarantine, and I never ended up getting any more because, the female just had babies in here, and I was satisfied with that. I have since gotten some. Like right now, I have some fish in quarantine. Recently, I got a white male guppy and a tequila sunrise guppy. They're in quarantine right now. They will be the first males that I move to this tank, male guppies. Not endlers, because I had endlers in here. And even before them, I also had another black bar endler that died during the ick episode. Yeah, so I added neon tetras on three separate occasions. I'm down to 9. I had as many as 13 or 14 in this tank. I know at least one, I bought 15 altogether. I know that 1 or 2 died in quarantine, and one of them was I believe was the ones that brought ick that first time. There's a shrimp. All right, so the shrimp, as of today, I've seen 4 red ones together. I could identify. Not, prior to that, I've seen maybe 2. 2 that I could identify separately, not as if I was counting the same one. So, and there's 2 clear ones and a brown one with a white stripe. So 7 shrimp in here. So I wasn't sure when I first added them if they were even going to survive, if they'd get eaten, because they were juveniles. I just scooped them up in my 3.5 gallon Neocaridina shrimp tank, and just kind of as an experiment, I put them in here. And even the first maybe 3 weeks or so, I didn't even see any, and then I started seeing them. So I'm glad they've been able to survive with all these fish. I haven't seen any shrimp babies. I don't know if they were to breed, if the babies would survive, but there's lots of cover in here, so maybe over time I'll start seeing more. And I'm not sure if I even have, if I have a female among them, but I do intend to add some more for my shrimp tank and make sure that I for sure do add a female at least. Alright, so what have I left out? So these guppies are cool. Like, they kind of have funky tails. Like some of the originals, I was calling them scatterbrain shanks. Just kind of a, they're essentially mutts, but as if they were a certain strain. Like some of them had, on the top of their heads, they have iridescent, shiny multi-colors, kind of like a scattered brain of colors. And some of them had like top sword tails, but they weren't like swords. They were kind of short little daggers, like little shank knives. So I was calling them scatterbrain shanks, but they have since grown more. This one right here kind of looks like it has where'd it go? I was pointing at that one right there. Kind of looks like it has a pintail. Okay, I have 2 female dwarf gouramis. Those are the last 2 fish that I added to this tank. Maybe around May of last year. Something like that. Last fish, last animals of any kind were the shrimp that I added a few months ago. Okay, and somewhere in here I have a narite snail. Don't know where it is right now. There's a shrimp again. Okay. And very soon, as I mentioned, I have some fish currently in quarantine. I have a blue platy, a blue moon platy I'm going to add to this tank. And recently I thought that fish might have had ick, and it might have, and I might have, either it didn't have ick at all, or I was able to stop it before it spread, because there are no signs of ick in that tank after I did a ick-X treatment. And I have pea puffers. So I'm going to try to I'm going to experiment and put one of the pea puffers in here and see how it goes, because I think it would be cool to have a pea puffer in a community tank like this. It might not work out well. It could, from what I've heard others say, pea puffers can be bitey, and they have all kinds of other fish that they can bite if they choose to, and there's they could go after the shrimp. And I just spotted it right there. That's the narite snail. Can't really, it's like a silhouette right there at the top. But I don't know if they would go after big snails like that, a narite snail, but they could go after, there are bladder snails and pest snails in here, but not that many. But they could go after those. But so the blue platy, a pea puffer, those 2 guppies that I mentioned, and the autocinkless. That's what I plan to be moving in here shortly after their stint in quarantine. But yeah, and that's how this, over a year and a half, how this tank has evolved, and the fish that I've added along with the fish that have been born in this tank, and now there will be some new fish added. All right. Well, thanks for listening to my rambling up to this point for 25 minutes. Thanks for watching. And I'm Jeff, and I enjoy fishies.